All right, let's get started. This is another webinar from GDS Storefront Estimating. And this time I decided we should talk about moving away from version 14 and into the WinBidPro version 15. There's a lot of reasons why I personally think you should do this, but this webinar will hopefully explain to you what those reasons are. And then you can make that transition. Now you'll notice here on the screen that I have both programs open. So when you do make that transition, you can use both programs at the same time. And there's also a little utility that when you install the WinBidPro version 15, it puts this import utility right here on your desktop. And if I click on that utility or on that icon, it gives me a list of all the vendors in your version 14 program, and then lets you check which ones you want to import into version 15. So that's definitely a possibility if that was one of your hesitations for switching. You can bring in all the catalogs that you've modified, all the part numbers you've entered, all those types of things. Now, we actually recommend that you use the new catalogs because we put a lot of time and effort into creating and modifying and just working on the new catalogs that are available for version 15. So you'll notice once you get into 15 and hopefully after this webinar that there's a lot of new features that we had to add the capabilities to the catalogs themselves, and which means there's more information in the catalogs in order to utilize those features. So that's another reason, or that's the main reason you want to use the new catalogs, is there's a lot more information, there's a lot more up-to-date, pricing, a lot more parts, a lot more systems, and all that. So a lot of reasons to go with the new stuff because it does take advantage of the power of the new program. So let's talk about some of the things that are the same. So in 14, we get into the program, we can select a job. You can either select it or edit it. Now, when we select it, you probably know it just basically selects it, gets you back to the main screen, and then I can go up and do something like optimize, and it knows which job we're on since we've selected it. So that's probably familiar to you if you're watching this video. So, and then if we go to edit, it would let me actually get to the screen that lets me edit the elevations or add new ones. And I can do things like change the framing system for all elevations. So I can do that in version 15. Now the difference is when I select a job in version 15, it shows me the first elevation right away. So we tried to make it so everything's kind of there in front of you. And if I wanted to do something like change the framing system for all elevations, I would go to jobs. And so these are the things that might take a little while to get used to. So there's an update utility, and then under that there's change to new frame system. So if I hit that, I can pick a different framing system, change it for the whole job. I can do things like change the color for the entire job. I can even update parts for the job. Now that's something that I'm going to jump back to after we do a little bit more. So with the version 14 program, a lot of the concepts are the same. We've got, your elevations are listed. You can edit the elevation. Now there's a few more clicks and steps, obviously, in 14. And if you don't know 15 yet, you'll see it right away when you start using 15. You have to click more things to do the same thing in version 14. Now I can change the framing system here, or I can just hit OK and keep using the same framing system. Now in version 14, we're able to change the layout, the panels, the height, width, all that at the top, and then continue on. Now I can't really get back to that. I can't go backwards to it. I'd have to hit done. I'd have to go to glass and hit done, and then I'd have to re-edit that same elevation if I wanted to go back and do something with the layout. So that's one thing that's a little cumbersome. So we've tried to improve that. We can jump around from one elevation to another with ease here, and we can also easily go from layout to glass and everything in between. So I can change my glass, and then I can jump back over and say, oh, I forgot to adjust the width of my elevation. I can change that real quick. So remember in 14, we'd have to go back and edit and then go through these clicks. I can change the elevation layout, and then I'd have to hit done here. It's going to tell me there's a little rounding situation, and then it lets me work on the glass. Now, one thing about 14 is you can't delete glass once it's already there. In 15, we did change that so that you can choose from 3 different options. You can view to see what kind of glass is in which either row or light. You can delete it and you can add it. You can do it by elevation, by light, and by row, where in 14, you can do it by row and by light. So I couldn't add glass to an entire elevation in 14. So just to let you know, this is going to be tough to, there's so many things that are different in version 15 than 14 that are not only different but new, that it would be hard to cram that into a half-hour webinar. But the similarities are such that you'll be familiar with the guts of the program. So that's something I want to touch on, and that gets us back to the part information stuff. So anyway, we tried to streamline the way the elevations work. You know, entering the elevations, being able to jump around easily from one elevation to another, and then you know, like I said, getting back from the layout tab to maybe horizontals to, like, this doesn't even have horizontals, so if I wanted to add them, I can just simply type 24 and they're in all panels, and it's going to tell me that some of the glass is going to change because we already had glass in there. But, you know, very easy to add horizontals. It was simple in version 14, obviously. So I don't want to go through each step like that with everything because there's so many features, but you know how to do it in 14, and that's a quick example of how to do it in 15. And that's something that, you know, if you're having trouble using a certain feature, you want to look at our training videos for that section of the program and watch just that. You know, you never have to watch every single video because you probably, some parts of the program become easier to you than others. But so the similarities are, you've got your glass table, just like version 14. It's a global glass table that works with the entire program so that every vendor catalog you're using uses the same glass table. So in that, where did we put glass? Under pricing, I think. Yeah, editor add. So it's a similar, you know, grid kind of row column thing where you can just click on. One of the main differences is there was only 99 possible records for glass or parts for glass in 14. In 15, it's unlimited, so you can have as many as you want. And one of the great things about 15 is this tool that is built into this grid called a filter bar, and I can just type in any column head and it limits my list. Like, and now I'm only looking at 71 that have the word clear in the description, and then if I wanted to do tempered clear, it shows me 33. So it's really easy to, and then if I wanted to do insulated, there's only 26. So it's real easy to narrow down the list, and all the lists in the version 15 program have that filter bar, so keep that in mind. But the concept of glass is the same. You've got one glass table for the entire program. And the parts list is very similar too. You have a parts list for each vendor catalog, and in 14 we have our parts right here. Same exact parts list pretty much. We've got a few more fields that we threw in. One of the key differences though is the multiplier, and we had to get tricky with the multiplier in version 14 because there was a code. So I think there was 4 or 5 different multipliers. If you're familiar with 14, you know this. And then there was an XX, which was like a universal multiplier. It would kind of determine if the part was a stock length or miscellaneous part or a door part, and depending on that, it would use one multiplier or the other. So it wasn't very intuitive. So instead of doing it that way, in version 14, we decided to do an actual multiplier. So your actual multiplier is shown here. Now, if I wanted to change a multiplier for certain parts, let's say for stock lengths, I would filter my list to stock parts. I would go up here to change a group of parts. It gives me a warning that, don't be careful not to change all your parts. And if I want to change all my stock lengths to a new multiplier, I would just type in that new multiplier right here and update. So now any part that has the type stock gets that new multiplier 0.6. So it's really easy to kind of modify your multipliers, but it's actually showing you what it is without having to remember what a code translates to, like it did in version 14 with these codes. So otherwise, you've got your parts, you've got your description, your stock lengths. So that concept is the same. And before I get back to parts, let's talk about framing systems. So framing systems are very similar as well. You have your framing systems listed. Each one you can edit. It has some basic settings like profiles. Now, version 14 had doors incorporated into the framing system. So that meant that you needed a different framing system for each type of door. Whether you wanted transom or non-transom, or medium, wide, narrow style, all that. So you had to have a copy of the framing system with a different door in it, basically. So in version 15, the framing systems are broken down kind of the same way, screw spline, can stick, shear block, all that, curtain wall. But the doors are separate. So the doors and door frames are their own set of systems. And then there's entrances that are basically a combination. So here's an entrance, for example, and it has this particular door frame and this particular door leaf. So there's some pre-configured entrances. And like I say, it's just a combination of the two. And you can create your own just by combining a door leaf and a door frame and naming it whatever you want. So when you get good at version 15, that's the kind of thing you would do. You would create your own entrances that you often use and name them something familiar so that's easy to pick. That way you don't have a ton of the same framing systems just with different doors, so it's not as redundant in this list. So there's a lot of different limitations that existed in version 14. I think you could only have, maybe it was 200 framing systems, I'm forgetting now, but anyway, that's unlimited in version 15. There were limitations on the elevation, size, number of rows for horizontals, number of panels, things like that. So all those limitations have been either increased or obliterated. So it's that's kind of where the power comes in. And so we've got our framing systems, very similar, parts very similar, glass very similar. The way the elevations are drawn, very similar as well. Let's see, I want to edit this job and edit the elevation again. So we're going to go back into here. I click through, I've got my layout. So once we get to here, we've got tabs that have unequal panels, bulkheads, horizontals, splits, alternate verticals, excludes, things like that. So all those things are just down here on this new program. We threw in an arch top. We call a window something like this over here, where you've got a piece of glass that spans multiple panels. So we're going to call it something different in the future, but window is all we could think of. So that's why we make a little comment here that says remove vertical segments, or make a transom, or there's a lot of different descriptions for what this really is, but it's not an operable window, so keep that in mind. But in 14, we had an actual transom tab. So the problem is if you stick a window over here between these two panels, or a piece of glass, it's not a transom, it's just a piece of glass. So we'll come up with a better name next revision, or next version. So, but the key here is these are all very similar drawing concepts. So you got your alternate vertical. We did add glass stops, so you could put glass stops like we did here in this transom. I could put glass stops in this light of glass down here. So we added that. We added equal horizontals. So if it was a curtain wall type system, which that's not. Let's see. Anyway, if you wanted every row to be equal height, then the equal horizontal feature would do that. I believe version 14 we added that later on, so that's something similar. So this latest version 14 has that as well. And so we just separated some things like the rake and the step, and what else? Like I said, the arch. So those types of drawing concepts are also very similar. So you can see that the guts of the program we kept very much the same. So the doors are different, but there's a lot of flexibility there. So we tried to put generic, oh, this is an older catalog in this one, so it doesn't have the generics. But all the newer catalogs, we put generic doors in that just have basically a generic part number with no price. If all you want to do is stick in a pair of doors with a transom, then it's real easy. Just pick generic pair, and then it adds it to your elevation drawing. So there's videos on that. It's real simple. The beauty is you get an actual door that looks like a medium style door, or a medium style with a 10-inch bottom rail, or whatever it needs to look like. So when you look at this door, it's obviously just showing it's a pair. You don't know anything about the style or the bottom rail. So the other key difference here is you've got a basic line drawing here, but there's no dimensions. So you know what the door in panel 3 width and height is just because we're sitting there. But now when we hit next, we need to get to something like, okay, there's an unequal panel in panel 2 that's 24 inches and 120 tall. But it's not until you get to the actual quarter scale drawing that you know any dimensions, where in version 15, we wanted to make sure you knew all that information as you're drawing. So the drawing itself is more of a what you see is what you get as well. So we have, we did some weird things too. We have mitered corners, which you can do, which, isn't the most used feature, but it's there. Let's look at a different elevation here. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing transom stop at the bottom of the door head, at the bottom of the transom. So it actually shows you that, which changes the daylight opening, which is dimensioned right here. So we're seeing that in this transom with those stops, we've got a 31 3/4 inch daylight. And then we've also got a daylight for, I believe these stops don't get dimensions. So that's just something it's not doing. But we've also got a 32.5, which is probably from the top of the door head to the top of the opening. So it's giving you a lot of different dimensions in this one. It's showing us there's an 1/8 inch subsill, which if we zoom in real tight here, we can see, oh yeah, there's something that the sill is sitting on. And in version 15, it automatically trims the verticals for that, where in version 14, you have to specify the trim value in your framing system. So a lot of little cool drawing features that kind of give you more power, basically. So now let me show you one other thing. Oops, back in this drawing here. So we see here, this is another what you see is what you get. Our verticals are actually shorter than the height of the head. And the reason for that is because there's a setting in the framing system that lets us add or deduct to verticals. Now there's an 1/8 inch deduct from the verticals. So that's something we don't want, because we don't want the verticals to be shorter than the height of the head. So there's a little message that comes up that says sometimes you have to hit the redraw button. Like notice how these haven't changed yet. I can hit redraw, and now it adjusted those vertical heights for me. So so that's something that you would just never be able to see in 14. It's not what you see is what you get. It shows your basic elevation drawing, but it might be doing some cutting behind the scenes that you don't see in the drawing. So you get used to it, but it's nice to actually see what it's doing. So the glass I already mentioned, you can only do by row and by light. You can't delete it. In 15, you can delete it, and you can do an entire elevation. If it's, say, a curtain wall where everything has the same glass, it's real easy to add glass to. So I I know version 14 is quick and you just hit next, next, continue and all that, but version 15 you could draw elevations actually a lot faster because you're not clicking on as many buttons and having to jump back and forth between the main screen and the drawings as much. So keep that in mind. I know it's different at first, but you will become faster at it because it's more efficient to use. Okay, so the parts. Now when we create, and let me just get back to an elevation. I guess let's go to the next one. When we create an elevation in version 14, it's basically grabbing all the parts from the parts list, or it's looking at the framing system. The framing system's telling the program what parts need to be used. The program goes to the parts list, pulls those parts and prices, and compiles them into the optimization and your final parts list. Now, so let's go ahead and do that. So when we process, we call it in version 14, I'm going to say process DXF. I'm going to say process all, do not stop, and I want to stop on the final parts, final metal. So there's an alternate material piece. This is where it asks you for that. In version 15, we can say there's an alternate vertical in, say, vertical number 7 at a width of 4 inches. And then it's going to add it to the drawing. At that time, it's actually asking for a part number. And then I can actually jump over to the parts list, and I'm just going to pick any old thing right now, stiffener or whatever, and insert it into my vertical material list. I can also cancel and leave that blank, but basically it lets me do it right then, so that when I'm actually processing, I'm not thinking, oh yeah, where was that? It tells me what elevation. It's elevation B and all that, but I don't remember which. It says right-hand wall jam. Okay. It's been a while since I've used this, so it tells me which component, I guess, in the elevation. But this is where I have to remember to put parts in, and I can right-click to, I think it was right-click right here, right? I can right-click to get my parts list, I thought. For some reason, that's not working. Or I can just continue on without putting a part in here, and it gives me a warning. So now I'm processing. It gives me my final parts. And over here, so in this case, what it's done is it's optimized and figured out all my lengths, cut lengths, stock, everything, stocks, cut lengths, and all that, and shows me the final parts. Now in this program in 15, I'm actually able to go to the optimizer and see it before I do anything with it. So what that means is it shows me all the cut pieces on top and all of the final optimized stock lengths on the bottom. So the one thing is you have to go through this step. So process all, do not stop doesn't exist anymore. What it means is you open the optimizer and then you tell the optimizer what you want. So in the optimizer, we're saying go back and get all the elevation parts and cut pieces, and then now go ahead and optimize them. The reason we do that is because we're letting you add in, if you need to add in some miscellaneous cut pieces that weren't in the drawing, if you need to actually modify any cut lengths that the drawing, for some reason the drawing didn't do it right, or you just needed some oddball situation that the drawing couldn't do, you can actually edit the part here and change the cut length. So the optimizer in 15 gives you some power that 14 never had. So same thing goes with the cut lengths. You can actually, with the optimized stock pieces, you can actually tell the program that you have some stock pieces lying around, add them in here, it saves them, and then when you optimize, it tries to use those pieces that you added, those stock lengths that you added, So there's videos on that as well. So you can watch all that stuff on the version 15 optimization videos. But so that's the trick. Now we can go to the cut list if we want, or we can even go to final parts automatically, kind of like we did in 14, and see our final parts list, which is very much the same as version 14. Same with the final glass. You've got your elevation glass, your elevation parts. So all that stuff's right here. In 14, you've just got your menus. Oh, and this is where it wants us to do glass. I forgot. Or no, that's Yeah, and then it shows you the final summary here, where the final summary in 15 is just a separate button you click on, but very similar, especially when you print it. So there's a lot of similarities. So, you know, the look is probably the biggest difference, and the doors, I admit, but as I say, with all the newer catalogs, we've got generic, predefined doors and entrances, but there's also a ton of doors that are very, configured specifically for styles and types. So there's a big variety of doors, but if you don't want to deal with any of that, you can also just add generic doors and then price them manually like you always did. So so that's something to think about. So what else? There's also shop drawing stuff. So in this one, when I hit shop drawings, it compiles the drawings, and I guess there are more elevations than I thought on this one. There's one of the big curtain walls. So, and then it's going to show me the tabs. Now on this one, let's see, if I go to shop drawings, oh, it's not going to open DWG. That was one of the problems with trying to use the shop drawing in 14 in the newer Windows programs. So let's get back in here. All right. Oops. And I need to select my job again. Let's see, CAD detail. Now it's been a while since I've done this part. There's the associations. Well, I guess what it does, if I remember correctly, it creates the DXF files for you. And then if there's details associated to the framing system, it'll create the details as well. Now in version 15, it does it a little differently. So let's see, if I wanted to print detailed drawings, that's what we do. Yeah. So I would have to try and fix this error. I forgot all about that problem with the newer Windows. So hopefully if you're using 14, you got that stuff working right. But if I wanted to look at my a dimensioned drawing, then I could actually just go to print quarter scale drawings, and this is how I would have to get to my dimension drawings. Now in this program, obviously the dimensions are always there, and I could even click our little CAD tool here, and it would automatically open whatever I'm looking at on the screen. So it's going to open up that same exact drawing in our little CAD tool. And I can do things like click on something and delete it, you know. I could add notes to the drawing and all that. So there's it's a very basic CAD program because it's free, but it does some cool stuff that obviously you can't do in our program because it's kind of working in a different capacity. But so the way 15 does it, when it compiles, I can add them all to one add multiple drawings to one sheet. There's configurations for that, but I can also skip through the different elevations and see them. Like there's an excluded jam, excluded sill, things like that. It still has the sub-sill in it. But then if I hit next set, this is where it shows me the details that were combined. And then I can actually go into our CAD software and manipulate those details, move them around and copy and paste them and things like that. So there's plenty of videos on our website about how to work with the shop drawing tool and the details and all that too. So just a lot more power in the drawing end of the program is the bottom line. We used an entirely different tool, and that's one of the reasons that when you so we're skipping through the elevations here. One of the reasons that when you see the drawing window, it looks like an actual CAD drawing, as opposed to in this one, it looks like what you would call a vector drawing. It's just lines. So obviously it's very familiar if you've been using this 14 for a long time, but it's a lot different, and it's nowhere like a CAD drawing just because of the colors and the no details and stuff, or no dimensions. But yeah, that's how it works. So I was talking about parts. When we create an elevation, and I'm going to go a few minutes over because this is important. When we create an elevation in version 15, we're taking a copy of the parts from the master parts list and assigning them to the specific elevation to the specific job. So in version 14, I mentioned that we're looking at the framing system, figuring out what parts are needed for the elevation, going back to the master parts list and pulling that information into the report. So what happens is, if you go and change things in your master parts list, and then you run and reprocess that job a week later or a month later, it's going to go and get the latest information from the parts, the master parts list. In version 15, since it made a copy of all that information, it sticks it specifically with that job and independent of the master list. So I can do an update on the parts list, I can go through and change things, but that job is still going to remain the same. So we did that just based on comments we got from customers that their information was changing and they didn't want it to. So with the 15 program, you have to intentionally change that information, and that was one of those tools that we saw here in the jobs window. If I hit update parts for current job, that means go back to the master parts list, look at all the same parts that we're using in this job, and then update everything that's being used. If I don't do that, it's going to keep an isolated copy the way it was when you first created the elevation or the job. So there's obviously advantages to that, but you need to know that that's happening. So now the trick is, if some of the information is wrong in the parts list and you don't realize it until, say, you get to the final parts report here, there's a couple things you can do. I even added a tool that lets you update the master parts list. So if you decide, oh, I'm going to fix a bunch of prices and stock lengths and descriptions and things in this list here, you can run this little tool that says update master parts, and that's going to go back to the master list and update them there, because you didn't realize it until you got to here, let's say. So you have two different ways to keep things up to date. The difference is, if you choose not to, you can leave things the way they are here and you can update them in the master parts list, or you can update them here and leave them alone in the master parts list. So quite a bit of flexibility. There's a lot of little things, like if I wanted to price my parts by package, I know that I have a this is something that the version 14 never could do because it didn't have a lot of this information. But if I know there's 100 pieces for setting blocks per package, and my job is requiring 294 setting blocks, then it knows, if I want to price it by package, that I need 3 packages. So it depends. You can check this box down here and price it by package, or you can uncheck it and price it by unit. So you have a lot of flexibility with that stuff too. The labor was changed. So if you use labor in the 14 program, it wasn't very flexible in terms of breaking out the cost of fab and install for horizontals, because they were combined into one lump number. So we did things like change it to per joint, per cut, things like that, so that the doors are kind of broken out more separately. That's probably very similar, but we actually included installation time for adjusting and hardware. We also included fabrication time for doors and things. So we tried to break things out in a little more detail in that instance as well. So there's also some miscellaneous charges that you could never add in the 14. There's also some job-related charges like scaffolding and steel reinforcement, things like that. So there's the labor is a little more flexible. There's some videos on that you'd want to watch if you switch over and start using or when you switch over. It's not if, it's when. But there's the key here is there's videos that I've done over the years that cover pretty much every part of the program. Some of them are the shorter 10-minute videos, some of them are the webinar videos, so those go into more detail. But the main thing I want you to get out of this video now is that a lot of the core concepts are very similar. The glass, the parts, the framing systems, the way the elevations are created. You're going through and putting horizontals in. You're putting in 15, you're putting the doors in, but you're putting you're excluding a vertical, or you're making an alternate vertical that needs to be a corner post. Things like that. So an unequal panel. So all those things are very similar in 15. We've just improved on a lot of them, like a transom here. We could never split a transom up like this in version 14. Another thing you notice when you're in the layout tab, I didn't like the way that you only saw what you've done so far. So I don't see any horizontals here. That doesn't mean there are no horizontals in the job. It just means I might have to click on the last tab here to see what's been done. If I click on the first tab, it only shows me up to that point. I didn't like that because I want to see everything that I've done no matter what tab I'm on. So if I'm on doors, nothing changes in the drawing. So that makes a lot more sense to me, and I think people that use 15 would agree. So this has a very lineal kind of process to it in version 14, where version 15 is kind of more of an open form, kind of free form thing where everything's there at once. So there's a lot of advantages to that. I know it's new and different, but once you get used to it, I think you would appreciate it even more, because you start seeing why it's helpful to have all that stuff there. So the key is know that a lot of the core concepts are the same. Know that there's a lot of videos that can help you with the details, things like the generic doors, and if you're not sure what to click on to do, like the optimizing, you have to optimize by clicking on the optimizer and getting the parts and optimizing. Knowing that the parts in this final parts report are an isolated copy from the master. That if you want to change something in the master and have it affect your job, you actually have to use that little tool that I showed you earlier to update your job with those changes. So otherwise, things are independent, and there's advantages to that as long as you know that that's how it works. So there's a lot of things, just the way the program operates, more like true Windows, being able to adjust the windows and save the size and all that stuff. So there's a ton of things I didn't cover, obviously, but those are the key elements here. So both programs can run at the same time, as you've seen. They both work on the same license. There's a lot more configuration done in the catalogs for version 15. I mentioned that earlier, that a lot more framing systems, all the doors, the door frames. One of the reasons we did the doors separately is, like I say, less redundancy in the framing system list. But also, I can actually just have a door leaf in an elevation. If I wanted to get rid of this door leaf in panel 8, I could say delete selected door leaf, and then now I'm just going to have an empty frame. So if that was going to be a wood door or something, you could leave it open, or you could even create a door that has a part number for a wood door, and then just have no styles, so that it looks kind of like a blank door. So there's a lot more flexibility in that, the way we've done it in 15. So the shop drawings are better. We've tried to do more reports, more breakdown with parts, elevation, like listing all the parts for the elevations for an entire job, rather than in one sheet, in one report, rather than having to have separate reports for each elevation, which you can still do, but we kind of added some reports that were never there in 14. So I know it's overwhelming at first, but keep in mind that there's a lot of similarities, and that the concepts are very similar. So it's not going to take you, it's not as hard, and it's not going to take you as long as you think to get comfortable with. And especially knowing the things I've told you about the, I mentioned the difference between the master parts and the job parts. That same thing consists when you have a door and a door frame. There's master and there's job related information. So anything you tweak on a job can stay with that job and doesn't affect the master. But it's easy to easy to work with once you know that concept. And that's the reason that here we have, it says edit Elev frame sys. We can do that here and we can do it up here. The reason for that is you're editing just this elevations framing system. So if I change that, it's not affecting the master framing system that I selected when I created the elevation. So now it's created its own copy of the framing system. And any of those adjustments I do, like changing profiles, added daylights, the way it cuts the head and sill, all the different parts, which there's a lot more part possibilities in version 15, so that helps a ton with curtain wall and hurricane systems and things that are just more complicated for construction. So all this information is specific to this elevation. And if I change it, it stays with the elevation. So I know if I want to change it in the master list and have it apply to the job, then I know I need to go up here, change it in the master list, and then I can reapply the framing system to the entire job. So I don't have to go through and change each and every elevation. So once you know how it works, there's ways to take advantage of the concepts and save time and energy with it. So those are the keys. The way that the program isolates a job and elevations, and the way that you can still change things by changing the master and then having them apply to the job itself, or you can leave them alone. So it's totally up to you how you want those things to do. Like here's one last tip before we go. If I were creating another elevation, I've got 7 now. If I wanted to create an 8th elevation and I wanted some changes that occurred in this elevation framing system, like let's say from this point on I want to have a 4-inch sill, and that 4-inch sill is going to require some different part numbers. I don't know. So I click here and I pick some other part and I insert it. So now the 4-inch sill is applied to this. It's excluded right now, which is fine. But it's applied to this elevation, this framing system. If I continue and hit next to create a new elevation, 8th elevation, if I could spell, 8th elevation, and then I'm going to use the same framing system. I could actually pick a different one if I wanted, but I can use the same framing system as the previous elevation. It's going to pick up all the stuff that previous elevation had. So that's one trick. If I just wanted it to be the same exact type elevation, all the changes I made, including that 4-inch sill, would be carried over as I go down the line and add more elevations. So if I didn't want that, I would have clicked a different elevation or even reselected the same elevation. Framing system, I would have reselected the same framing system. It would have gone back to the master list and pulled all the original settings in, and then I'd be back to the original. But so you have a choice of whether you want to continue using what you've changed, or you want to start from the master again, and or even a totally different framing system, obviously. So so lots of differences. Like I said, I didn't have time to cover them all or nearly all of them. So I did want to cover what's similar and what's kind of very different, so that you knew what to expect. But there's going to be a point where I think Windows 10, we have a few people that had some luck getting version 14 installed. I'm not really sure how they did it. We are going to have to stop supporting version 14 because we're working on version 16. So we can't, we have to draw the line somewhere, basically. We can't support 3 versions of the program. It's just we don't have the resources. So there's a time, and it's probably going to happen at the end of this year in 2015, where we're just going to have to say, we can't support it anymore. If you guys can still use it, that's great. It's the same license, so if your license works, as long as you can get it to work, you can use it. But there's so many advantages to using 15, and version 16 is going to be that much different as well, except we're trying to make it even more streamlined, easier, but it's still going to have a lot of the same concepts. So it's my advice, you want to start using 15 before version 16 comes out, because jumping from 14 to 16 might be way too hard. So it's better to do things in progression and kind of the way we intended them instead of not, I guess. So anyway, be sure to watch some videos. Hopefully this helped a little bit, and good luck with all your estimating.